Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri. I'm your host. Thank you very much for tuning in and happy holidays. So today we have a guest from UK. And before I introduce my guest, I want to introduce my book, which is called A Gift from Adversity. It's the same title as this podcast, A Gift from Adversity by Juri. And the subtitle is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. And it's available on Amazon. If you're interested in, it's available. And if you know somebody who's struggling on these issues, it's available also on Amazon. So I want to talk a little bit about the podcast. This is episode 91, and I'm very grateful to have guests from all over the world. And then when I started this podcast at the beginning of this year, 2022, I was really hoping to bring more conversation to the adversity, but not only that, the tools that people use to overcome so we can together overcome these obstacles in a more efficient way and better way. So let's introduce our guest. Hello, Steve. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. So, Steve, let's introduce you to our audience. Can you tell our audience who you are, where you're coming in from, and what you do? And also, if you have a website or social media, we can share.
Sure, yeah. My name is Stephen Calis. I am a podcast host from the southwest of the UK, a small town called Yeovil. And if you're interested in my social media and stuff, you can just find me at the Steve Calis Show everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're experimenting with all of it, unwisely sometimes, but we're on everywhere.
What is your podcast about?
The podcast, it changes its face quite a lot depending on my mood and what I want to record. But for the most part, it's a journey through the human experience. We interview people who are experiencing extraordinary grief and things that no human being should have to endure, but somehow they do. And then they come on the show to teach us about how they sort of put up with it and how they have thrived. But sometimes the show is a little bit sort of out there. Our last guest was a man who believes that he has been in contact with a Sumerian god for 20 years via email. And our guest before that was a man who believes he's been abducted by aliens 60 times. And he was a super soldier in an intergalactic war. So it just depends on the depends on the guest. But it's a journey through the human experience. That's what I like to describe it as.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, thank you so much and happy holidays to you.
And to you.
Thank you. So, Steve, let's dive into our conversation about a gift from adversity. So, the first question is adversity. Can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
Well, broadly, there was a lot really, but broadly speaking, my problem was always my own brain, and was always myself. I was never quite wired the way everybody else was, and I was a very very happy boy. My family life was amazing. My mum is just an angel. We had a great life growing up, so it was always unusual to me that I felt so different and felt so separated from everybody else. And that difference when you're a kid can lead to unwanted attention from bullies or from people who don't understand your sense of humor or what you're trying to do, because you're still sort of carving a personality for yourself at that age. So I was bullied a lot in school. And then as I got a little bit older, I learned to deal with the bullies by fighting back. But I took that too far and I became quite a violent character, and I got arrested a lot for fighting and for fighting in the streets and that sort of thing. But because I felt that it was important to make up this character, that is tough character, as a shield to protect myself from everybody else. It doesn't work, but that was why I was so violent and getting into so much trouble. So my brain has always let me down. It led to me having problems with alcohol and drugs, and for a long time being homeless, living on the streets, migrating from place to place just to try and stay warm and go to where the food is. So to be honest, there was a lot, and it's spread out. And my adversity depends on what age you want to come in at, because but the answer most of the time will be my own mind, unfortunately. So my life is defined as a struggle to control my own impulses and the way that my brain works.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go back to your childhood a little bit before you got into adult life. So
Mhm.
you mentioned a little bit about being different and then having bullied. Like, how was it? Like, who were bullying you? Like, was that your students, like, friends, or maybe teachers? Like, who are the
Right.
main people?
Sure. I didn't have a lot of friends when I was very, very young, because I was just, it wasn't you would be sort of uncool by association by sort of being too close to me. So no one wanted to risk their, even at that young age, kids are very aware of their place in the pecking order. So but before, when I was in infant school and even the very early years of junior school, people didn't want to get too close to me in case they got some of my uncool on them. So I was being picked on a lot by older boys, a lot of the older boys, and then eventually boys in my own year. And I would get beaten up, and my mum would come to the school to try and sort the problem out. But then it would just keep happening because I was weird and I was an unusual, I was an unusual boy, and people didn't want to spend time with me. And it was very, very sad. And that would go on to shape a big part of my personality. But I was attacked a lot, I was beaten up a lot. And the most vicious, the things that stained my personality the most, and the thing that I remember the most, is the subtle bullying. It was people who were smart making jokes at my expense without me realizing. It was people who were making me a target without me realizing I was becoming a target. So it was a very subtle mental sort of bullying, as well as a very physical bullying to begin with. And then, like I said, yeah, but to be fair, this interview has come at a very good time, because it's only in the last 3 weeks that I've started to really process my life up until this point, because I'm now a father. My son is going to be 2 soon. And I've only just realized I don't know if any of your guests have ever experienced this, or if you yourself have experienced this, but I found recently my brain is forcing me to deal with certain trauma or certain unresolved issues from my past. I'm waking up in the middle of the night after having a dream, and that dream is a memory, and I'm chewing on it all day until I process it and deal with it. So this podcast has come at a good time, because the bullying side that I'd completely forgotten about or I'd suppressed, it's only the last few weeks really that I've been dealing with it.
So, I'm very sorry to hear that. And you mentioned a little bit after you became adult, like you started to fight back and you got arrested and stuff. So how are those situations? So people, are the same people who are bullying you at school, or completely different people who started to bully you?
No, this was, I think, if I'm honest with myself, a lot of this, as I became a man, when I became sort of 17, 18, 19, 20, I filled out. I became, 6'1". I became much larger, much stronger, and I was able to defend myself. And because I'd felt so weak and so underfoot and so embarrassed to be myself for so many years, suddenly I had this power, and I had the power to intimidate someone, or I had the power to hit them and make it hurt. And for a while there, I was lost in that. I enjoyed it almost, and the thing I was enjoying was the shift in power. Suddenly, people were talking about me as someone who was, you don't want to get to fight. I mean, it's all nonsense. It was just a character I was creating, and I was very good at exaggerating the stories. So I would come out of it always the tough guy. The stories would become more and more spectacular, and they would become wild. But the point of it was to make myself seem more tough. So I started to get more and more violent, and I got arrested a lot. And a core memory for me is when I was maybe 18 or 19, is my mum came to the police station because I'd been arrested, and I was in the little jail in their cell. And my mum sat with me the whole time I was in there, which was, I don't know, it was like 19 hours or something. I was in there the whole time. And that was just one of many, many times I'd been arrested for being violent. And it led to me not being able to get work. It led to me not being able to achieve my career goals later on that I wanted to achieve and stuff. So it was terrible, really. It was really, I mean, I haven't actually spoken about that out loud for a long time. That's the first time, so it's a lot of interesting emotions bubbling up there.
So when you got arrested, and then you mentioned a little bit about alcohol, like different addictions as well. Like, can you explain a little bit? Is that like combination, where, like, when you are meeting with this crowd, maybe you got introduced to hard drugs or maybe alcohol with the
Yeah.
people that you probably met in jail, like, in those kind of circles?
Sure. Well, I was lucky enough to never actually go to prison for extended stay. I kept going to Crown Court, but then getting just lucky enough to never going to prison. So I was always spending time in the police cells that they have on site. But mercifully, I never went to prison. But the drinking and drugs, I was I was always abusing, especially alcohol. Our culture here in this town was to drink from a very early age. We were 13 and 14 years old, and we were drinking all around town. Go to a park, we'd get really drunk, and then it was a sort of badge of honor to get so drunk that you throw up and fall over, or get into a fight, or smash a window, or destroy something, because those stories sell really well on the on the playground or at school in the classroom. Yeah, the more destructive you were, and the more people sort of feared that part of you, the more respected you became. It's really toxic, and I guarantee it still exists now at the same school. But I was very much caught up in that, and I. At that age, between the age of sort of 15 and 20, it was mostly drinking. I was drinking a lot. I was drinking heavily. I was just looking to I was looking to it's again, it comes back to my brain. My brain sometimes is a gift. It enables me to be creative, enables me to have all sorts of positive personality quirks. But at the same time, it does feel it is a curse. I am cursed with sometimes feeling trapped in my own brain. Sometimes it's a desperate and very loud scramble. And no one person on earth understands how it works. So even my lovely partner Misha, who is my fiance and the love of my life, it's even difficult for her to understand how my brain works sometimes. But drinking and the drugs was, especially the drinking, was a way to just for a minute escape, quiet my brain down, and just be a little bit more outgoing, step outside of myself. And then when I got older, in my early mid 20s, that's when I started to experiment with cocaine, with speed, all sorts of drugs, because they were even better. They made me even less aware of my own brain, so they were even more of an escape. But it's temporary, and it comes at a terrible cost, and it's a price that you don't pay until much later on. So I wouldn't say I was ever a drug addict, but I was a very, very heavy drug user for many years, because I was just trying to put my consciousness somewhere else. I don't have to deal with it here. Does that make sense? Am I just waffling on? Or is that
Yes, thank you. And then what kind of health side effect that you had experienced after using these hard drugs and alcohol? Did you encounter later on, like, any health issues associated
oh,
with?
no, no health problems. Not so far. Not so far. We're okay. But it's the toll that you pay is on your mind, because whilst you are escaping these things, these incidents, these parts of yourself that you need to deal with and you need to process, you need to understand why your brain works a certain way. Whilst you're trying to escape those things, you aren't dealing with yourself and you aren't dealing with your own mind. So you're just delaying it. And one day you're 30 years old, you're about to be a father, you're in love with this amazing woman, and suddenly you have to deal with all of these things that you've done and said, and this person that you've been over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. So the price has been mental, because my depression and my anxiety now is still pretty terrible. Luckily I have the right tools and infrastructure in place to keep me from falling too hard.
I know some people develop some of the heart disease, or like, anything that it's related to um
Not yet.
yeah, so I'm glad that it's not happening. Or kidney, like, I had a friend who had like a heavy alcohol addiction that led to death at such a young age for blood clots and then kidney failure as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awful. But no, mercifully, I would never have said, I would have said I had a dependency at some point, but never, I wasn't at a point where I was waking up in the morning thirsty for a drink. And I managed to stay just shy of that, because I was using it more as a social tool, I felt like all my superpowers were dormant until I'd had a drink, or I'd had a spliff or a bit of coke, or whatever it is. Those things were enabled, where they were shortening the path between who I was and who I wanted to be, who was a personality that only ever came out if I was drunk or stoned, or whatever it was. But luckily I would never, I don't, maybe, but I mean, luckily I wouldn't have said I was never an alcoholic. I was never a drug addict. Probably I was just a heavy user. But maybe I need to address that as well.
And how old are you right now?
I'm about to turn 32 in a few weeks. And
So,
I'm in a good place now. It's the best and happiest time of my life now, and I don't regret any of these things. I mean, we haven't touched on a lot of the. There's a lot of things that have happened. A lot of things I've had to process, especially the last few weeks. But if the way I see it, if I remove any one of those things from my own timeline, then I might spoil the ending or where I am now. Like, for example, if I didn't get arrested so many times, if I didn't do the drugs, if I didn't make all these stupid decisions that at the time were awful and really affected me, I might never have met Misha, my fiance. I might never have had my son. You know what I mean? All those things might have been pivotal to the road that led me to where I am now, which is a very happy place.
so let's actually go back a little bit. So bullying association first, but then did you experience any depression or anxiety? Like, how was your mental health stage when you were experiencing all this adversity growing up?
Yeah, terrible. My depression is my sort of lifelong companion. It's always there. It's always the worry, and I have struggled with that to such an extent where I've. I mean, this is a story that I'll tell you that I don't tell a lot of people. But before before I met my partner Misha, I'd about a year before that, or wherever it was, separated from my partner of 3 years. And then I was sure I'd hit a point where I was so miserable, but to a point where I wasn't really feeling anything. I would just sort of, my mind and body had just sort of shut down. So I took out a loan from the bank for about £15,000. And I decided, because I knew I was going to kill myself, I thought, I'm going to commit suicide, but what I want to do first is I'm going to just try and live, try and find a reason to live. So I spent £15,000 just traveling around the sort of south of the UK, having experiences, meeting people, doing things I haven't done before, and really going wild with that. Lots of drugs, lots of drink, really sort of destroying myself, because I knew I was going to kill myself anyway. So why not? There's no fear of dying. So it doesn't matter how many drugs I do or how much drink I drink, because I'm planning on dying anyway. So there was an expiration date. So I got home to my hometown of Yeovil after I'd spent the majority of that 15,000, and I thought, I'm going to do it, and I'll give it a few days, because I want to make sure that my not my affairs are in order, but I want to make sure that I've written the right notes and that people know I love them and that sort of thing, and then secretly just sort of check out. So when I was thinking this to myself, I received a message from my friend Josh White asking if I wanted to go to a pub to meet his new girlfriend. And I thought, well, Joe, it might be the last time I see Josh, so I'll go with him and have a great night. Now, his girlfriend brought her friend called Misha, and Misha and I immediately hit it off, and something happened. It was a bit like, and I'm not a spiritual guy, but it was a little bit like the universe was saying, here she is. She's here. You've been looking for her for all these years. Here's a reason to live. Here's a reason to keep going. And she's going to love you. You're going to love her, and it's going to be great. And I felt that sort of straight away, and we hit it off straight away. And here we are a few years later. We've got a 2-year-old son, and we're engaged to be married. And life has never been better. And I would not have known that. I would have died not knowing that there was greatness, and there was love, and there was laughter, and there was so many things on the other side of the darkness. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Depression was your companion. That's just like really powerful. Can you explain, like, when people don't understand how bad the depression is? I know it's stemming through the bullying, and then you said you had great parents and stuff, but because some people are coming from dysfunctional family, like my case as well, and that definitely contributes to that. But in your case, it was like you're kind of unfit and then getting bullied, and then that like add to your depression. How do
Hmm.
you describe people who's never been bullied and who's never had this kind of experience that when you say depression is my companion, how do you explain that? Explain that.
Well, it's a little bit like there's a constant sense of foreboding where, I mean, even if I'm not feeling depressed, there is a small part of my brain always going, okay, any minute now you could wake up tomorrow and not want to get out of bed. And it's almost like the depressive figure, the depressive shadow that I become walks in tandem with me wherever I go. And then every now and then will just decide to take over my personality like a demon or a ghoul or something. It just every now and then I'll be possessed by this person who is just a, a fraction of myself. It is a sad, witless, energyless being that inhabits my body, and it's very, very hard to shake off. And for the longest time, I was ruled by this thing because I just couldn't. I was if I would just succumb to it. So whenever I feel this depression, the depression would hit, and it would just all my progress would be undone. It feels so. That's how I mean. If that's the best way I can describe it to anyone who is unsure, it feels like there is a constant, dark, malevolent spirit following me, and every now and then it decides to take control, and I have to wrestle back control of my consciousness, and it's horrible, it's exhausting, and I've had to do it ever since I was 13, 14. I'm much less intimidated by it now. I have the tools to combat it, but when I was a kid I was frightened. Why do I not want to get out of bed? And you could say, I mean, when you said I had a good childhood, I had a great mother, uh, which is key. My father I didn't meet until a little bit later on. So and he wasn't around. So my mother was amazing, and she was a defining figure. But even I didn't know how to communicate it. I mean, the thing with my son as he grows older, I will make sure he has the vocabulary to explain. I'm feeling this way. I don't want to do this. My brain feels like this. My body feels like this, and so he can explain to me exactly how he feels, and I can help or do what is necessary. But when I was growing up, I had no vocabulary for it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why I felt sad all the time. Why did I want to cry all the time? Why do I feel nothing now? It's a really I grew up having to learn every nuanced part of my mental illness myself and how to navigate it. And I it was awful. It was just horrible. And I didn't even really like talking about it. That's how difficult it was having to navigate that. But it's important to talk about it, obviously. But today's a different world, and it's much more acceptable to talk about it now. But otherwise, man, yeah, it's been rough.
So in UK, the situation is different than America, and in America, and then in Japan, it's definitely different. Say in 80s, when I was growing up with the domestic violence, sexual abuse, nobody talked about it. It was never talked about it, and it was almost like normal. Like the parents beat the kids up and then just tolerate it. And alcohol usage, like we have vending machine in Japan, and anyone can buy it. So like we started drinking like at like fifth grade, sixth grade, and then people were throwing up, and I'm like, I'm done with this. And there's like no like IDing. I've never seen IDing, like no getting alcohol in Japan. And then there was no mental health like resources or conversation around that. How was it in the UK growing up in your generation? That were there any like guidance counselor or school or anything that it was accessible for you?
I don't know, but again, the issue that we faced, an issue that I faced, especially at school, like the school I went to, you couldn't. Your social status was everything. It determined whether, yeah, the cool kids wanted to spend time with you or whether the girls wanted to spend time with you. You couldn't afford to be vulnerable like that, and that's a small petri dish of the larger culture in the town at that time, or even in the UK at that time, 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, whatever it was, when I was growing up. It is not acceptable for men to be anything less than in control or masculine. And actually, weirdly, this is one of the thoughts. The other day, I had a sort of dream. I had a dream about my father. My father's still alive, and we still see him every now and then. But we've never had a proper father-son relationship. It's always been quite complicated. But I had a dream about him the other night, and the dream was where he it happened in real life. So it was weird that I dreamt it. But my father's father, so my grandfather, died on their driveway in the family car of a heart attack when my father was 16. And for the first time, I thought, man, at 31 years old, I thought that must have been horrible for my father to have experienced that. And there was a few things that he must have had to endure as a young man that must have been terrible. But he grew up in a terrible time in the UK where men had to be masculine. They had to be masculine. It's not, you couldn't talk about your feelings like that. You had to be a fighter, or you had to be, especially here where there wasn't a lot of money in this town, you had to be tough. You had to be tough. And those fathers have bred children my age who risk not being able to communicate properly how they feel, because our fathers were totally incompetent when it comes to their emotional vulnerability, and we had to learn manually to deal with that. So that's what it was like. And it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to be sad all the time. Yeah, it wasn't okay to be traumatized.
Do you think the culture is shifting in 2022 in UK a little bit?
If I've got anything to do about it, yeah, I think so. Because I've been especially militant on this since becoming a father myself. Because, I mean, I've noticed that there are companies who have realized that um, there is social clout or the social positivity if they suddenly invest some money in mental health or a mental health scheme. It looks good on social media, plus it benefits people in the wider community. There are people who are now able to, thanks to podcasts like yours, and we did a show called Better Than Yesterday, which is a mental health podcast, and there are hundreds and hundreds of podcasts and TV shows and that sort of thing where people go, wow, I'm not alone. Everyone feels like this, or that person feels the same way I am, and they are talking about it in a way which makes total sense to me. I'm not alone now. I get it, and now I can adopt those tools to see if that can help me, or figure out my own way to combat this. So it is changing. There's a lot of work to do, but we're getting there. It's much better. We are my generation. And I'm especially proud of a lot of my friends who grew up with me in that sort of tougher environment. We are not afraid to love our babies and to kiss them and cuddle them. And, you know, we were deprived of that from our fathers, not from our mothers, but from our fathers. But we can change that and turn that around. We can be good fathers and love our babies the way our fathers should have been loved, but they weren't.
And it's a cultural thing too, and then also the war that we experienced, World War One, World War Two, and then coming back from the war, like my grandparents' generation as well. And then especially in Japan, we are economically very depressed, oppressed, and then the recovery from the World War Two as well. I'm sure that contributed for our mentality to be recovering from it, and then really catching up other countries as well. So we have to really put our minds to work, and not really do the self care or whatever, just to compete and then be academically, economically competitive with the other world, outer world as well.
Yeah, 100%, totally agree. That's always been, from a UK perspective, that's always been what I've blamed it on. There was our fathers and their fathers had fathers who fought in a war and who had nothing, were surviving on rations. They had to deal with a sort of blitz mentality. They had to live in desperate times. So they became tough because these tough times bred tough men. And those tough men had tough sons. And it was just a product of the age that they were in. But now we live in an age where actually we see that is damaging. And men haven't historically have been that good at maintaining relationships, whether it be marriages or friendships. But now we're much better able to do that. We're much better equipped at this generation. We don't want to go too far where we're we're too soft on, and we raise a generation that's too soft and too mollycoddled, because unfortunately the world is cruel and people can be cruel, but we are able to say, listen, I love you, the world is tough, I'm going to try and help you as best I can, prepare for that, but if it gets too tough, I'm right here and I'll help you navigate it. We can say that to our children now, and it's totally normal and okay.
Thank you so much for having this discussion. And it's interesting because I obviously grew up in Japan and then I came to America. And then now we're talking UK, America, Japan, like mental health, and then the men. And I feel like a lot of our generation suffer from the lack of affection from the parents. So, how it happened, say, for instance, even the bullying was happening, if there was really consistent love and affirmation, and that bullying can subside and maybe can move forward a little bit. So I think when you think about the overall picture of the history of the war, fighting the Brits mentality, like you have to be tough, and then the men has to like really not talk about these mental health issues and depressions and identify what it is. I think that really contributes to that. And then I think that's our generation's like overall kind of universal suffering.
Yeah, that's right. It's a generational curse that we have that you and I have the power to break. I mean, I shared recently a post from Twitter where someone, this comes up once a year, where some famous person, there's a picture of them kissing their baby, giving their son or daughter a kiss, and then there is so much abuse, and there's so many, because it's not okay for a man to kiss his son or kiss his daughter, and show that kind of affection. It's weird, and people think it's weird and they get sort of attacked for it, and I'm so against that. I mean, I will kiss my son until he's older. He doesn't want me to do it anymore because it's embarrassing. You know what I mean? I want to be affectionate. I want him to be able to, I mean, growing up for me, my mother was amazing and so affectionate, but it also that almost comes at a price, because my mother would envelop me into this safe, loving world full of laughter and comfort at home, and then I would leave the house, and suddenly the real world was much, much colder, because the difference between the real world and my life at home was so drastic. It's so cold out there. People are going to be mean to you, and people are going to punch you and hurt your feelings. But then I'd come home, and my mum would just protect me from all those things, and I could never do anything wrong. My mum would always say, "Oh, baby, you didn't do anything wrong," and she'd always shield me. But in that shielding, as much as I'm grateful for that shielding, I also never learned how to properly defend myself, or how to prepare for a world that was indifferent to whether or not I was sad. You know what I mean? So I had to prepare myself properly.
It's a hard balance, and as cruel as it is for the outside world, and the mother's love and the protection were there for you, there's a gap, and then also the navigation part of it. It's very hard to navigate, like whether you're in anywhere in the world. So Steve, thank you so much for sharing all these adversities and challenges that you faced, and I'm sorry that happened to you. But let's actually move on to our second question, which is the tools that you use to overcome. So this part of the podcast, I've had so many guests sharing about really useful tools that they used, and then what I really hate, to be honest, is that when I share my adversity, people will say, "Oh, just find therapist. You need a therapist." But the therapist usually is maybe once a week or once in 2 weeks, and then they're not there when you're having panic attack, when you're having a depression, and then when you are really trying to survive. So then you become really vulnerable to this mental stage that a lot of guests share great techniques and then great tools that they actually applied for these situations. So, Steve, how would you say the tools that most worked for you to overcome to where you are today?
Well, I was fortunate growing up to have my core friendship group was this isn't a tool necessarily that people can obviously adopt and use, but for just to give you some perspective, my best friends, 10, 15, 20 years ago are still my best friends today. And having them in lieu of missing family members or family that weren't there has always gave me a structure and a sounding board and some kind of always gave me safety and love when I wasn't getting it necessarily from anywhere else. But when they weren't there, and in the sort of later years when I was very, very depressed and by myself and homeless and all these terrible things that I had to sort of experience, here are the things that I felt. And if you're listening to this and you're looking for tools to help you escape depression or anxiety, there is no one answer. And I'm not telling you this as a here's what I did, so it will work for you. This is just my experience. And you might find that on another episode, they might have an answer that is much better for you. But for me, it comes down to gratitude, for one, because we can totally lose perspective of the gift of life and what we have and the things that we've been given. So if I'm in a really bad episode, before I go to sleep, I like to write 3 things I like about myself and 3 things that I'm grateful for. So, I like even if it's stuff like I like my shoulders or I like this or like that. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful that I've got a roof over my head tonight because for many, many months and for a very long time, I was sleeping in the snow or sleeping in the rain. So you don't have to scramble too hard to find something to be grateful for. And then you can use that as a springboard to think, well, and the good thing about that is I found if you do it for a few months in a row, the distance between you and that positive thought shrinks. So my default mentality is always quite dark. Oh, don't like that. I don't like that. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? But if you can condition yourself, I think it's a sort of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where if you 3 things you like about yourself, 3 things you like about your life. Write those down. And after a few months, they are so concrete in your brain that you have immediate access to that sort of positivity. So it's reconditioning your mind to help. And gratitude is the main platform that I use to make myself feel better. But however, there are some times where even that's not enough. So I've got a second voice in my head that goes, I almost have to mother myself sometimes and say, okay, Steve, everything's okay. You felt this way before, you've survived, and you're going to survive this. So what do we do? And I tend to achieve very, very small things. I know this is a very sort of Jordan Peterson-esque sort of thing to say, but it's been in the writing for a long time where get up, make your bed, put some washing on, clean the dishes, very, very small things. And see those things as tick. I could have stayed in bed and not achieved those things, but instead I came out on top and I made my bed. I'd done this. I've come downstairs. So the small, I mean, I bet you'll hear this a lot probably as a solution, but the small victories are absolutely key because it's helping you remember that your core personality is still there. Because you go, wow, okay, it cost this much energy to make the bed. How much more energy do I have to spend for today? Can I now call someone? Can I now go for a small walk? Can I? And those are very, very helpful. And the pivotal thing is calling someone. Someone loves you. Someone loves you. Someone wants to hear from you. Someone wants to know that you're okay, or someone wants to know that you're not okay, so they can help and listen. Even if it's a professional, even if it's a Samaritan or a phone line you can ring, but someone that you know in your real life cares enough about you that they don't want to read about you or read at your funeral. They don't want to talk about you in the past tense. They want to say, hey, thanks for reaching out. Let's begin that conversation. So reach out to someone, try and find something to be grateful for, try and win that psychological battle, and mother yourself into a state where you can be proud of yourself for achieving small things, because you could have done nothing. You could have stayed in bed all day, you could have slept, you could have achieved nothing. But instead, you made the bed and you got up and you got dressed, you started walking. And that's big, man. That's really, really big. And you didn't have to do that, but you did. And that's you winning that battle. So that's how I tend to struggle through. But also with the knowledge of it's difficult now because I've got a 2-year-old son and a fiance that sort of depend on me. So that's a big motivator because I don't have time to wallow too much. You know what I mean? I don't have time to stay in bed all day. I've got to go to work because we've got to pay the bills. So I've got to find new ways to tackle my depression, and it's normally on the move. I've got to do it whilst at work or that sort of thing. But hopefully there's something in there that someone can use to help win the battle.
I really like what you said about small victories, like making a bed, getting up, and then, I was talking to my daughter this morning, and I said, "I'm very proud of you," and then she's like, I have not done anything," and I said, "No, you woke up on time. That's one of the victory, right? Like, no, you did a great job waking up on time and then going to school. That's huge." And I told her that. And then every day, like as much as you think it's easy, it's not easy to get up and to go to work, to go to school, especially when you're dealing with a lot of things that today can get so wrong. So I think grounding yourself, writing. I like the three things that you like, or affirmation modeling yourself, and then really telling yourself, and then subconscious shift. That's so hard because when you are growing up with so much of bullying and depression and arrests and then drug and alcohol and all that stuff, like you have so much self-image that's sabotaging you. You have to somehow wake up yourself, and then writing maybe makes you feel um, more concrete by seeing these words tangibly, and it's shifting your positive mind. I did that for 30 days of formation with my acting coach um, 2 years ago. So that every day he asked us to write about you, affirmation words like you are beautiful, you're strong. And when you're brushing your teeth, like you say that every day, a different affirmation for 30 days. It was a task and challenge. And that seemed to really help me because nobody really said that. So then I was seeking outsourcing to a relationship that ends up like abusive relationship in a way. So I really think that uses small victories and then writing and then really shifting your mind, um, and then having a motivation definitely can be
Well,
key.
if you don't mind, that's powerful what you just said, because that is something that we ignore all the time. Most, if you're listening to this or if you're watching this, there is a very good chance that you have an abusive relationship with yourself. We all do it. We all have it. Whether it's because of your diet or your psychology, whatever it is, we have an abusive relationship with ourselves a lot of the time. And so we need to learn how to love ourselves much better. It's not just a cliche. It's not just something that people say. It's a very, very true thing. Now, like I'm able to say with absolute confidence, I am a great father. I love my fiance. I'm really trying to be a good partner and a good husband one day. I'm good at those things because I work at them. I'm good at my job. I'm good at podcasting. These are things that you don't have to worry about sounding arrogant. They're things that you can go, this is grounded in reality because I've worked at these things and I'm acknowledging that I'm good at these things. So we need to stop abusing ourselves. And that's so true. And a good way to visualize it is my friend Tom Sims, who is a very, very good life coach. Tom always says that treat your mind like a garden. If you neglect it, the weeds will grow. It will suffocate the flowers, and the garden will look terrible. The grass will grow. It will start to just descend into chaos. You have to tend your garden. Trim the weeds, look after the flowers, cut the grass, and it will remain as calm as possible. So that's why I tell myself and people, tend to your garden, wherever your garden might be.
So treat your brain like a god, you said?
Treat your brain like a garden. Yeah, like a
Like
garden.
a goddess.
Like a garden, yeah. Cut the grass, cut the weed, make sure the weeds don't grow. Take care of every part of that garden so it looks beautiful and it's functioning. And then you'll see that it's a much more peaceful and serene place to be. Because if you don't take care of your garden, the weeds will grow, the weeds will develop, they'll entangle over everything, they'll swallow everything, the flowers will die, the grass will grow, and it'll be a terrible place to be. Look after your garden. Your mind is your garden.
I've never heard of that expression, and I think it's beautiful way. And how do you tend your brain like the so the weed won't grow? And you recognize that there are weed, there's some toxic that you have to take care of. How do you identify that? And that's the problem that a lot of people who are in the middle of depression or in the middle of addiction, you don't just even realize that there's a weed.
That's a great question, and that's what everybody should be asking themselves, right? And that's a really good question. But from my experience, there are biological and evolutionary necessities that we as human beings need to, so that on a very, very base and primal level, we are taking care of our mental health and our primal selves. And those things are going for walks, because we need to see green, we need to see nature. Something about that is a balm to our current selves, because we are evolving far too quickly, and or the world is evolving, or the world is changing so quickly that we're not evolving quick enough almost to get used to it. So being in nature grounds us. There's actually studies that show that being in nature, it calms you, it makes you feel so much more relaxed and at one with nature. So my advice is, so you do things like that. You eat a little bit better, drink more water, take baby steps. These things are how you, from an evolutionary standpoint, tend your garden. Eat a little bit better today. Eat a little bit better. Don't eat if you're not eating great, then don't eat perfectly today. Just eat better than you did yesterday. Drink a little bit more water today than you did yesterday, and gradually build that up. Go for a walk. Even if you take your shoes and socks off and stand in a field, just be much closer to nature than you have been. So those are the sort of fundamental tenets of that belief. That's how you start to tend your garden. And then you go to the much larger, more complicated things. Am I in debt? Do I have something? Is there a company I need to call because the bailiffs are coming? Or is there something I need to achieve to make sure that I can be at peace? Because if I keep putting off these phone calls or these meetings, it's going to get more and more stressful. So from a sort of clerical and financial standpoint, what baby steps can you take to improve today from yesterday? How can you make today better, and how can you make tomorrow better than today? Have that uncomfortable conversation, go to that meeting, ring the bank, whatever you need to do, get that done. Then you think, okay, well, what else is there that needs work? My relationships with my family. Tell your mum that you love her, tell your dad that you love him, or have the uncomfortable conversation if you think that they are neglecting your emotional needs in some way. Have that conversation with your partner. It has to be, the framework has to be your own life. So the trick is to be self-aware enough to sit down and go, okay, what do I wish was better? What bothers me? What upsets me? What makes me feel terrible? Am I eating too much sugar? Am I eating too much salt? Am I sad because of this? Could I have a better relationship with my friends or my boss? Or write them all down and then move them into an order of severity. What needs to be dealt with now? What can be dealt with a little bit later on, when I've got confidence and my life is a little bit more in order? That's how you tend your garden. Acknowledge where the weeds are and just start cutting.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. I really appreciate your conversation. And what I really love about the podcast that I started, and then I'm very proud that this is episode 91, almost hitting 100, is that all the guests who I had on my podcast, um, they definitely went through the hardship and hell. And then growing up, I definitely felt alone in it when you are in these situations. And I just I'm starting to feel more and more of the importance of conversation. We talked about it earlier, normalizing these difficult conversations and the mental health talks too, and then really having this access to the tools that you just mentioned about tending the garden, like tending your brain like a garden, and then writing affirmations, and then those are the things that we can definitely use daily without paying so much money, and then going something like crazy, spending money to fix yourself. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, hey, and I appreciate the time to sort of talk about it. I mean, I hadn't planned anything, I hadn't structured anything for the interview, so yeah, I appreciate you listening to me whilst I sort of go off wildly on a tangent. It's very kind of you, and I appreciate the time. This is a great podcast, and if and I think that you're doing a really, really good thing here, because people need to talk. People need to listen to prior experiences. I mean, some of the people we've spoken to on our own show, we spoke to a mother who had they went canyoning, they went exploring a canyon, her and her two daughters, and a sudden rainfall meant that the canyon flooded, and her two young daughters, aged, I think one was say 6 and 12, for example, the daughters' ages, they both drowned in this canyon, in this flood, and the mother was beaten beyond all repair. She barely survived herself. And then we spoke to her a year after this incident had happened, and she had such potent clarity. I mean, a lot of hers was faith-based. She was one of these very, very lucky people who finds a lot of strength and courage and light in religion. But also she had this really great advice for how to survive And since then, I've gone, man, I've had no problem that is anywhere near as severe as that. And then sometimes I think to myself, there are maybe hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people maybe, who would dream of a life just like yours is now. So that's where the gratitude sort of part comes into it. But having these difficult conversations and speaking to people like that, it changes you a little bit and it makes you think, man, okay, we're all primates. We're all monkeys trying to get through the day and trying to survive in a world that is evolving way past what we're able to cope with.
Steve, I just want to share something personal with you, our audience. So today I was thinking to myself, so I do have a lot of crazy, wonderful accolades and then activities that I do as a journalist, actress, and musicians, and then I'm like everywhere. But then these are the outsourced external accomplishment, but the internal accomplishment is I really came far for taking care of myself, my mental health, and if things can get so wrong. Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
That's okay. You were telling me about your internal sort of achievements
Yes.
and accomplishments.
So I can fix this on the audio part of it, but let me see if I can remove this one. Okay, great. So I'm sorry about that. So let me go back so I can repatch. So today I was when I woke up, I was thinking about this outside external accomplishment that I had, but the internally I feel that I definitely at a completely different place, and I can put in perspective the things can go wrong today. So no matter how busy I get, I have this sense of feeling that if I'm not okay, I cannot do this task. So I really appreciate you coming here and then bringing this conversation to the light. Let's move on to the last question, which is a gift that came from this adversity. So what would you say a gift that came from your adversity?
I am. I mean, I know the answer to this one because it's something that brings me a great deal of peace. But I am prepared for my son to grow and turn into whatever sort of person he wants to turn into. I am prepared to love and father him however he needs me to do that. I'm ready. I'm ready to be a great dad. For the first time in a long time, I'm ready. I'm ready to be a husband. I'm just without all those things, without all of those pieces falling into place, I don't know if I would have arrived at that. But my son's going to have a pretty great father, and that is the gift that came from all of the things I've experienced. There's nothing he can do. I mean, we haven't touched a fraction of the things that I've done myself and the crazy, stupid, wild things that I've done. There is nothing my son can do that can surprise or offend or upset me. There is no decision he can make that will shock me. Whatever he does, whoever he chooses to be, I can be there as a stalwart, loving pillar of, I'm here. I understand. I've been there. I've done it. If you need me for advice, I'm here. If you just need love and someone to talk to, I'm right here. So the gift is really for my son more than me, but I'm prepared to be a great father.
That is so beautiful. Well, thank you so much again, Steve. Before you leave the studio, I want you to give an advice to somebody who's listening and then maybe going through the similar adversity that you went through. What is your biggest advice?
Find your gratitude and build on it, because the things that, if I were to ask you what are you most grateful for, those first three things that you come up with, and you are able to come up with three things, those three things are staples of who you are and your happiness. So build on them, find out what they are, develop them, and then find what other things you might be grateful for. You are the sun in your own galaxy. You are the source of power. You are the source of heat and light and energy. Everything you need to survive until tomorrow and the day after is in you. You just have to scratch at it sometimes and find it, but it's there. Trust me, I've been there.
So thank you again for coming into A Gift from Adversity. And I really appreciate having this conversation. And we will have more guests coming up for A Gift from Adversity. So thank you for all of your support.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been great. I really appreciate it.